Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page, coming back to you on Thursday, January 14th, 2021. We are studying our way through the Gospel according to Matthew, and we are in Matthew chapter 5 today. We're going to start in verse 21. Glad to see everybody joining on. Greetings. Good to see you, Brian and Lyle, Gail, Louise, and Debbie. Appreciate y'all being here today. Okay, so like I said, we're in Matthew 5. We started that yesterday. There's just no way to finish that one chapter in one video. Hey, good morning, Gene. Glad you're here. No way to finish Matthew chapter 5 in just one video. There's so much. Good morning, Connie. And we're going to pick up where we left off today. Well, where we left off yesterday, we're going to pick up today. So we looked at verses 17 through 20 yesterday in Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus gives us his his view of the law of Moses. Again, as I pointed out yesterday, Galatians 4 and verse 4, Jesus was a Jewish man who lived under the law. Oh, Garrett's here too. Hey, Garrett. So what we have here in the Sermon on the Mount, again, Luke records it also. It's in Luke chapter 6. And we have Jesus legislating here. We know that Moses was the lawgiver. Of course, that law originated with God of the Old Covenant. He delivered it to the Israelites. But Jesus is the lawgiver of the New Covenant. We are under law to him today. And we start seeing his legislation here, if you will, if you want to use that terminology, in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 21. Again, he's given us his view of the law. He didn't come here to destroy it, to tear it down. That's what we talked about yesterday. He came here to fulfill it. Again, that is to fill it up, to complete it. Romans 10 and verse 4, Paul said that he is the end of the law. And that word end means goal. Everything in it pointed to him, and he came to fulfill it. And so we don't want to break those commandments, he tells his audience in Matthew 5 and verse 19. But when we start reading in verse 21, the rest of the chapter is really broken up into sections. The Bible that I use breaks each section up and has a little title for it. For instance, Matthew 5:21, the little heading above that says, "Murder begins in the heart." He's made the admonition, if you want to be part of the kingdom, your righteousness needs to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Now, beginning in verse 21, he shows how that's going to happen. What does that mean? My righteousness needs to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. Let's look at it. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Okay, that's Exodus chapter 20 and verse 13. And whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say, this is interesting because in each section here, you have that, he'll quote the Old Testament, and then he'll say, but I say. And the Greek is an emphatic little phrase, ego de lego. It's literally saying, I am, but I am saying. So this is kind of an attention getter. You need to listen up. I'm the one who's speaking here. Here's what the law said. But I say to you that whosoever is angry with his brother, and here's the key to understanding this particular one. Circle these three words if you mark in your Bible. Without a cause. You know, anger is a God-given emotion. The emotions that we have, joy or anger, I would say sometimes even apathy, those things come from God. Anger is not sin in and of itself. In fact, we are told to be angry and sin not. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26. Jesus got angry. There's no question about it. We have two accounts of him driving people out of the temple, physically removing people from the temple because he was angry. So anger is not a bad thing. The bad thing is here, whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause, okay, shall be in danger of the judgment. Whosoever says to his brother, Reka, shall be in danger of the council. Basically, looking at that word, Reka or Raka, they're empty-headed person. And again, the frame, this is all framed in the idea of you're doing these things without a cause. You know, sometimes a person can do or say something without thinking. They're acting as if there's nothing in their head. Well, if you do that kind of thing without a cause, you'll be in danger of the council. Whoever says you fool will be in danger of hellfire. So what do you do? What do you do if you are the person who is the offender? Well, here's his instruction. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Oh, this always important is emphasized throughout Scripture is our relationship with one another. Obviously, the most important relationship is our relationship with God. But the fact of the matter is, and Jesus points it out here, if we are not right with one another, we can't be right with God. If we're mistreating one another, if we're angry without a cause, if we're cruel and rude, and we're the ones who are causing it, we are the problem. And the responsibility is placed upon us to go fix it. You leave your gift at the altar, and the way I compare this or parallel this today, we don't go to an altar and worship and offer animal sacrifice like they did under the old law here, but we go to worship. And we can't worship God correctly if we're angry with somebody who's in the same room with us, and we may be sitting there in the auditorium and looking at this person and thinking negative thoughts about them, sitting there in anger. We need to get out of there, and we need to go reconcile with that person. Again, Jesus uses the word first in verse 24. Then you come and offer your gift. Then you come to worship. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny. Okay, so there needs to be reconciliation. And if you're the offender, you have a responsibility to rectify it. Now, the interesting thing is when you get to Matthew 18, beginning in verse 15, you're now the offended one in that passage. But the responsibility there is also placed on you. If your brother has offended you, you go. Here, if you have offended him, you go. We cannot cop out of these things, and someone's hurt my feelings and or sinned against me. This is more than hurt feelings, by the way. We need to understand that too. This is causing someone to stumble into sin, these offenses. We need to go fix it, whether we are the one who did it or we are the one it was done to. We're not supposed to sit around and wait for somebody else to fix it for us. So here's what it means then to for our righteousness to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. It's not just about murder. It's not just about that physical action that someone can take out of anger. It's about in the heart. Where does this start? Where does murder heart? You can read Mark chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. And Mark tells us that all these things begin in the heart. And one of the things that he talks about is murder. You don't have to carry out a physical action, in other words, to be wrong. We need to watch our heart. And then he gets to another topic here in verse 27. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. That's Exodus chapter 20 and verse 14, one of the 10 Commandments. But I say to you, again, the Greek phrasing is, I am saying. A very emphatic phrase in the Greek language here, showing his authority. Whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This verse has caused a lot of trouble and a lot of misunderstanding. And what is adultery? What is fornication? These are two different terms. Adultery can be committed, according to Jesus, in the heart, with the thoughts. Notice here, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery in his heart. Now, we always think of marriage and divorce and remarriage. We always think of Matthew chapter 19 and verse 9, and we should. Not just verse 9, the whole section there, Matthew 19, verses 1 through 12. It's also in Mark chapter 10 and Luke chapter 16, where fornication is listed as the one exception for divorce and remarriage. That's the only allotment that Jesus gives. If a person commits fornication, they can put away their wives or their husband. It goes both ways, by the way. They can put away their spouse and marry another. Here we're dealing with the heart of the matter. It's, in other words, just like murder. It's not just about the physical act. What's behind the physical act? Well, you're looking at this person a man or a woman, whatever the case may be, and you're lusting in your heart. And so there's some instruction here, some very specific and difficult instruction. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. Now we know Jesus is not teaching self-mutilation here. He's not teaching you to pull out your pocket knife and literally pluck your eyeball out of your head. That's not what's going on here. This is about self-control. This is about self-discipline. This is about the idea, as he frames it here in verse 28. If there is a woman that a man is lusting after her, he needs to do whatever he can to get her out of his life. Whatever he has to do to get her out of the way. Why? Because it is better, it is more profitable for you than one of your members perish, than your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Same thing here. It's better to go into hell with, better to go into heaven with one hand than go into hell with both of them. Whatever it is in your life, my life, that causes us to sin, again contextually here, lust, cut it out. Cut it off. Whatever it is, get the person, get the thing, whatever it is, whatever you have to do, get it out of your life. Why is that so? Why does he illustrate it in such a way of cutting off a hand or plucking out an eye? Because we're dealing with heaven and hell here. We're dealing with Gehenna. We're dealing with the lake of fire. You can keep those things in your life that tempt you, that cause you to lust, and the word lust means a very strong desire. And again, desire, that's a part of our God-given makeup, attraction and things like this, but lust is a different thing. Whatever you have to do, if it's going to cost you your soul, you get it out of the way. Again, a person, a thing, whatever it may be, get it out of the way. Furthermore, verse 31, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. This is Deuteronomy chapter 24. And again, he cites the old law, and he says it's not just about the physical, it's also about the spiritual. The scribes and Pharisees had limited it to the physical action, and that's not what this is about, not what following him is about. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except fornication. There is only one allotment for a spouse to divorce his or her wife and marry another person, and that is fornication. It's not irreconcilable differences. It's not abuse. It's not neglect. It's not anything if we're talking about divorce and remarriage. The only allotment is fornication. Now listen to this. Whoever divorces his wife for any reason except, those three words, any reason except, fornication causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. This is not hard to understand. I've got a whole section in my library, right over here to my right, that is dedicated to debates and discussions on divorce and remarriage. And there are as many opinions, just about, as books as I have on that subject. There shouldn't be. And well, I guess if they're teaching the truth, there should be, but as I'm sure you know, a lot of people do not teach the truth on this subject. There's only one reason for divorce and for a remarriage, and that is fornication. That is the sexual act between a person who is married and someone who is not their spouse. That's it. That is it. Verse 33 beginning, he talks about taking oaths. This one's kind of interesting to me. I was reading something a while back. I don't remember when, and I don't remember where. I mean, I know where I was physically, but I don't remember what I was reading it in. About one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And you know, typically we look at that and we say, well, that means don't say, oh my God, or use the name Jesus Christ as an exclamation. And I agree with that. We shouldn't use God's name frivolously. We shouldn't just throw it around as a curse or as a matter of surprise and just use God's name in a vain manner. The word vain in the Bible means useless or empty. But there's also throughout the Old Covenant this idea of taking his name in vain in the sense of making a promise and not keeping your word. or taking a vow and not keeping your word, specifically in the name of the Lord. And that's what Jesus deals with here in verses 33 through 37. It was said of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. Well, that's Exodus 20 and verse 7. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. This is Leviticus 19 and verse 12, talking about keeping your word. Perform your oaths to the Lord. And then he says this, but I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, nor Jerusalem. And he goes on and on. Don't make some fancy effort or some extreme glorified effort to make a grand promise when you don't intend to keep it. Here's his teaching. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. That's very simple. Keep your word. Be a person of, a word we would use today, a person of integrity. If you're going to say you're going to do something, do it. If not, don't. And then he says, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Being a person who vacillates, a person who can't be depended upon, who goes back and forth, that's not a godly way to be. And this is a very practical thing in life. If you give somebody your word, keep it. I mean, I just, contextually looking here, he's just talked about marriage, verses 27 to 32, and divorce. You make a vow to somebody, you keep it. I think that'd be a practical way to apply that. Again, it's not just about the physical act. It's about what's behind it. It's the heart. Because out of the heart proceed all of these things. The Pharisees and scribes had limited it to what you did physically. Jesus doesn't. Go the second mile, beginning in verse 38. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's Exodus 21, verse 24. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you, what we're dealing with here, as you continue reading here, down through verse 42, is retaliation. You don't retaliate against people in an effort to take vengeance for yourself. Couple passages. Romans 12, verses 17 through 21. In that, I'm not going to quote all of it, but in that section, Paul says, vengeance is mine. God will take care of it. You act like a Christian. And then 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 21 through 25. Jesus left us an example that we should follow in his steps, who, when he was reviled not again. And it goes on from there. That's the pattern that he set for us. We are not to seek out revenge. We are not to get even. And that's a very common thinking among most humans. If I'm done wrong, if somebody says something to me that hurts me, I'm going to get them back. Jesus says, no, don't do that. You go the second mile. Don't resist that kind of treatment in the sense of retaliation. Give to him who asks you, verse 42, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Be a good-natured person, basically, is what we're dealing with here. Another passage I think you could throw in there is the discussion of persecution in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. There's a lot that's said right there about how a Christian conducts himself in a hostile environment. We don't seek revenge. We don't seek retaliation. Think about what's going on right now in the United States of America, okay, politically. As it's being called in politics and in the media, the insurrection that was attempted last week, people storming the Capitol, because a lot of people felt that they were robbed, that their vote didn't count, and they're angry, and they stormed the Capitol building. Property was damaged. People died. A Christian has no part in that. A Christian should have no part in that. Let me say it this way. And in fact, I just finished writing a bulletin article for the church here this week talking about American Christianity. And it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast this morning as I was studying, and they were talking about that it's kind of a unique to America mindset, that I have these God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or the God-given right to own a gun, or the God-given right to rebel against an oppressive government. Here's a challenge if you believe that way. Find me a book, chapter, and verse where you can substantiate that claim. That as a Christian, I can go out and violently revolt against our leaders. You're not going to find it. What you will find that was written during the Roman Empire is you obey the laws of the land, obviously, so long as they don't require you to disobey God. We need to think about this in the context of what Jesus teaches here in Matthew 5:38-42. You go the second mile. You don't seek revenge. You don't seek revolution. There's a lot more we could talk about there with revolution. You think about how this country was born. It was born by men who revolted against a government, an oppressive government. Yeah, we'd agree it was oppressive. Forced state religion. Taxation without representation. And men were sick of it, and they violently revolted. They killed people because they didn't want to live under that form of government. A Christian has no part in that. Should have no part in that. That's not what we are told to do. A Christian can live under any form of government and can still be a Christian. But I think there's a unique tie here with us as Americans that for some reason we think that God wrote the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and He didn't. It was written by violent men. It was written by men who violently revolted against a form of government that they didn't want anymore. That ought to make you think. All right, back to it. Matthew 5:43 beginning. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor. All right. Leviticus 19:18. The Old Covenant made a lot of allotments for neighbors, and not just people who live next door to you, but for orphans and widows. You know, those people who either couldn't care for themselves or were very limited in their ability to care for themselves. So love your neighbor. But then it has this, and hate your enemy. Now, that was a misapplication. Over in, I thought I had it written here in the margin of my Bible. Let me look here for just a second. Verse 43. Yeah, over in Deuteronomy chapter 23, it talks about the Israelites, when they entered the promised land, not seeking the peace of certain surrounding people. They took that to mean you hate them. You love the people that are closest to you. You love the people that are just like you, and you hate everybody else. Well, that was a misteaching of what was said back there under the old law. Now here's our challenge. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you. That word spite there means to, the definition I've got written here in my Bible is to reduce or to lie about, to diminish someone. A person treats you like that, what are you supposed to do for them? Pray for them. Why would you do that? Again, we're supposed to, we got to stand up for ourselves, right? We got to do what's right here and get back. Well, here's why we do this. That you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. For He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And see, that's the challenge of this Sermon on the Mount, going back to Matthew chapter 5 and verse 20. Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Here's the practical application of what He says there in verse 20. You love your enemies. You do good to those who use you and pray for those who persecute you. Verse 48. Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. What does that mean? Perfect. God is perfect. So what does that mean? Let me show you how Luke renders this here. Luke chapter 6 and verse 36. It says, therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. That's what we're dealing with. He's not telling us here to be sinlessly perfect. He's talking about in our day-to-day, human-to-human relations, you need to be merciful to your enemies, just like God was merciful to you. Because see, here's the thing. When a person is in sin, they are at enmity with God. James chapter 4 and verse 4. If you're going to be a friend of the world, you're an enemy of God. Well, how did God treat His enemies? Read Romans 5 verses 6 through 8. He sent His Son to die for them. So if we want to be perfect in that sense, if we want to be merciful like God is, here's how we treat those that we would consider our enemies, those who persecute, misuse, who belittle us, who lie about us, etc. Treat them like God treated you. That's a challenge. That is not easy to do, because I think sometimes it's just I guess I would just say it's in us as humans to retaliate and, to want to right the wrongs, as we say. Well, God will take care of that. He'll right the wrongs one day. He'll have as Paul says again in Romans 12, 17 through 21, he'll take vengeance on the evil. We don't have to do that. Okay, so here we have it. Matthew 5. Christ is beginning his legislation, if you will. Here's how the scribes and Pharisees have interpreted the law. Here's what I'm telling you to do. And we find these principles that he lays out here throughout the rest of the New Testament too. All right, guys, I went over a little bit today. There's just so much in that chapter. A few comments. Glad to see all the viewers. I saw at least 24 viewers at one time. That's great. Wayne says we must not be hypocritical. That's right. Sharon says in our minds. And yeah, that goes back to, murder beginning in the heart, adultery in the heart, etc. It's in the mind, isn't it? Debbie says, God knows our heart, and we should watch what we say and do and strive to have a godly heart. That's what it's all about. Again, as Matthew 5:48 says, we want to be like God. And that is not easy, but we try every day to do what he would have us to do. All right, guys, that's what I've got for today. You're welcome, Sheila. Thanks for being on here. That's what I've got for today. We're not going to be here tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday. Our services will be live streamed Sunday at 10 o'clock. And if you're able to catch that, you can catch it later. I also upload what I do with our Sunday sermons or Sunday services is the service is live streamed, but afterwards I go home and I trim the video down to the scripture reading and sermon. So this Sunday, the sermon is going to be, I'm starting a series based on some reading I've been doing about scouting reports. And we're going to start making a scouting report of various people in the Bible. Sunday, we're going to talk about the devil. We're going to look at a scouting report on Satan from Scripture. So that's Sunday. We won't be back here till Monday at 11 o'clock, and we will be starting Matthew chapter 6. So once again, thank you for being here today. Hope you have a good weekend, and I will see you on the next video.